Good evening, Janice and Kathy. Thank you for being early. We'll just wait for everybody else to join.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for joining early.
Yeah, no
Wait and
problem.
see who else will join us.
Kathy, the link worked. We got you in.
I'm in.
Oh, you got a new hairdo too.
I hate it.
You hate it.
Yeah. I'm a natural girl. This is not me. It looks like my mom's hairdo.
Well, I was gonna say it looks good, but now I'll just keep it to myself.
I'm so glad I'm here. Usually I have problems getting on. So.
Hey, Mindy.
Hi. Yes, glad to see you, Kathy.
I'm glad to see you too. Have a good weekend.
Not really. I ended up having to do a lot of work, but I'm
Oh.
gonna make up for it this upcoming weekend. I've
Oh, no.
committed to that.
Just take vacation.
We'll bring it up in the next commission meeting. Motion to give Mindy a vacation.
It did not have anything to do with you all, so that puts your mind at ease.
Thank you. You aren't that important. Say that.
Davis is experimenting with the backgrounds right now. Hey, Monique. We can't hear you, Davis. I see your lips moving.
But he's not muted. I think he's just actually signing.
Monique, what is that cool wall behind you? Is it like your kitchen or your office?
This is our office wall. This is my pandemic project where we did one of those accent walls and the molding and all that jazz. Yeah.
Looks really good.
I'm not usually in here. My husband monopolizes our home office, so I was lucky to be able to snatch it today. But it is. Thank you. Let's see, who are we waiting on? No, and sure, I'm gonna have you call. Is there somewhere easy I can find our roster so that I can help with roll call?
If you're on Basecamp and you go to the executive committee file, there's the contact list. And so that has everyone, but it's segmented by subcommittee.
Is it? Okay. All right, oh shoot. Let's see if I can pull that up.
Good everyone.
Good evening. Hey John, how's it going?
Hey, John.
Good. Going good. Good to see everyone.
Hey, Connie.
Hey
We
there.
still can't hear you, Davis. No, I think you're trying.
Davis, how you doing? How's your family?
He somehow has audio issues.
Oh, his audio.
He keeps trying to talk, but
All right, David, calm down. Well,
He must be
good to
double
see you,
muted.
Davis. Thank you for being with us. Good to see you.
Have the host tried to unmute him? That didn't.
Yeah, he wasn't muted. Now it says that he's muted, but before he wasn't actually muted. So you said if I go to what, Mindy, on Basecamp?
The executive committee page,
Mhm.
and then you go to docs and files, and you should see like a contact list, an Excel spreadsheet in there.
Hey, Mindy, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Committee contact sheet. Let's see. All right. Oh, now it's asking for a password. What's the password?
Hey everyone, nice to see you. I do apologize. I always have issues with my camera. I'll turn it on and it goes back out. So that's what's going on. But I have the pretty "We Are All Together" screensaver. So nice to see you all.
Hey, Andrea, good to see
It
you
says
too.
it's password protected. Is it supposed to be password protected, Mindy?
Really?
Mm,
That's strange. Okay, I will,
I mean, I know Sharuk has had it before. I was just trying, oh, nope, I got it here. I just had to open it in a different, yes, okay. You have agenda up.
Monique, I think in that original list, Zucky was on a different subcommittee, but he's on ours. So on my sheet, I just moved him down.
Okay,
But I never pulled it off of Basecamp. I just went and found that old email from Mindy
okay.
or Yolissa, whoever sent it out. Fun random fact about the "We Are All Together" mural in Brookhaven. When we bought this house, our realtor is friends with the lady who actually painted that, and she painted a picture of our house and gave us postcards of it, which is
Oh,
pretty
cool.
cool.
Oh, dope.
Yeah.
cool.
Awesome.
People pay big money for that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. She was just like a goodie bag that our realtor gave us, and really good friends with her. We know our realtor is friends with a friend, so I've actually met her at their wedding, which was cool.
Awesome. Yeah, she did a good job on the "We Are All Together" song, post
Yeah.
painting. Really nice.
Yeah, I saw it in the paper. I was like, oh, that's Allison. That's cool. She's famous now.
Maybe your house worth just went up, right? It's in the picture. Value just went up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Davis, I don't see a mute. Can you say something?
No, and I don't believe you're actually talking. I
He's
don't-
not talking.
All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and take roll. So we can get this party started. Someone want to share the agenda? Would that help to have it shared?
Yeah, I can pull it up.
Or
Just give me a
does
second.
everyone? have a question?
I don't mind.
Hmm.
I need permissions to share my screen. Andrea, if you could do that, please.
Oh, I guess it's not necessary. It's just always easier for me to stay on track if I have it.
I'll ding the bell when it's time to move on, Monique.
I was gonna say, I could just go,
Here, let me give you permissions 1 second.
Sure. I think Davis switched to a phone. But now you are muted.
all right, everyone, well, I'm gonna.
This is what happens when you don't come to a meeting for a month. You forget how to do things.
Lucky you. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is now 5:37. Thank you, everyone, for your time on this beautiful, is it Wednesday? Wednesday afternoon, evening. Welcome, as always. We're just going to go ahead and take roll, see who's all here today. I have my co-chair, well, myself, Monique Wright Hudson. I am present. Sharuk is present. Connie
Present.
is present. Janice. Lauren.
Did she drop off?
No, Janice is here. Janice, you're on mute.
Oh, yeah, I see Janice, but Janice is on mute. Okay. Lauren Collins. Lauren, I don't see Lauren. I don't know that I had an email from her this week, but I see Davis. Davis, you don't have to worry about it. You're here.
Davis is here.
We can hear you. And Kathy Wells.
Yeah.
Hey, Kathy. Jeremiah Henson. Jeremiah is the one that is no longer on our our commission, right?
Yes, that's correct.
On the commission, okay. Kirk Nelson. Kirk Nelson. Okay, so, and then and Zaki. And Zaki, I didn't see him tonight. All right, so I have absent Zaki, Lauren, and Kirk, and Jeremiah. All righty, thank you. So first we wanted to go through and do a quick debriefing regarding the use of force training. And we wanted to just kind of talk about what, how everyone felt, some feedback on it to the extent that we could provide feedback to Brookhaven PD, who was so kind and gracious enough to allow us to host us through that training. And then as we're debriefing, please understand that we're later in the agenda. We do have some discussion of priorities for our subcommittee, and I think that discussion and trying to prioritize our work going forward will be really necessary to kind of reflect on our use of force training to some extent. So don't feel like you have to get it all out at that point, because we are going to talk a little bit more about it after we discuss the 4P assessment tool. So does anybody want to say anything regarding the use of force training?
So Monique, I think that Davis, Kathy, and Janice weren't able to make it. So just as a quick recap, the use of force training was split up into two parts. So in the morning, Lieutenant Snively basically led us through first watching some sometimes explicit dash cam footage and body cam footage of situations where police officers have had to use force, with a very, very, very short analysis about that. I think that was one of the things that came up, was the analysis portion of that could have been longer to talk through what was going on and stuff, but it was still a way to kind of level set what we were talking about today. And then we spent, I think it was something like 2 hours basically going through case law around various Supreme Court cases and history behind how use of force in terms of legislature has evolved over time, right? So there's, I think it was 3 cases. I can't name them off the top of my head. I'm sure I could find them if I needed to, but there was like 3 fundamental cases that went through the Supreme Court that kind of define what force is allowable in which situations. And then there's a bit of a hodgepodge of state laws that go along with it, right? Of when you do have to detain someone by law for certain actions and stuff like that. And it may necessitate force. As an example, in the state of Georgia, you have to detain someone in a domestic violence situation if it's clear that that person is the perpetrator, right? It's like the legal responsibility of the cop that they have to control the situation. And so to do that, they may have to use force, right, under the law, but they have to use it appropriately. The second half was, so that was at City Hall. The second half was at Brookhaven Police Department here on Beaufort Highway. And we basically split up in 2 groups. One group went through a virtual simulation. So basically it was a computer program. We were all given a belt with a firearm, some mace, and some taser. And you could, but fake, obviously. But basically they were laser guided, and like the firearm had CO2 in it to kind of mimic recoil a little bit, though it doesn't really mimic the recoil of a 9mm. Almost there. But basically it was like this giant screen and surround sound speakers. It was relatively intense. And there was a lieutenant who would play the script, right? Or the scenario. And then based on your actions in the scenario, he could take you down different paths on how the person would respond and this and that. And so we each did like 3 or 4 of those. And then we would swap. And when you swapped, you had a different lieutenant. I think Lieutenant Martinez maybe was his name. And he basically did a live simulation acting as a mental health patient who had been called upon several times. There was a domestic violence call from the neighbor or something, right? It was very clear that he had assaulted his wife. His wife was scared and away. Your job was to detain him, and his job was to make it impossible for you to detain him peacefully, right? And you just kind of went through this role play of how it was. And, you know, I think the person who went first got the most entertaining view because they got to watch the rest of us struggle through our go at the scenario. So John got to watch me struggle, but then I got to watch everyone else struggle. So that was cool.
They made me go first.
You are a chairman, John.
Great. It was a great experience.
So that was basically what was covered. And one of the things we learned is that, you know, so Brookhaven does this annually. One of the pieces of information we learned is that these sorts of trainings and the extent at which Brookhaven does it are not required by the state legislature. So in many situations when Brookhaven is doing it, they're doing above and beyond what the legislature actually enforces upon various police departments across the state. So it wasn't a way to say, okay, this is what everyone does. Of course, our focus isn't everyone, but it's important context, right? This is just what we do. And we've made an intentional decision in Brookhaven to go above and beyond the requirements in several different ways. That being said, my thoughts on it were, I basically am interested to see what else surrounds all of this, just this one day of use of force training in terms of what civilian interactions with civilians look like, right? So there was a lot of situations you were in, especially in the simulation, where it was like, you knew that you were addressing a person who could potentially be violent, right? So they met the description of someone who murdered their wife, or they hurt someone right in front of you. It's visible, right? Like it's clear violence. And of course, there's one way to handle that. But then when that's not the case, right? When there's not much probable cause, what are the policies of how to engage with that person to make sure that that person doesn't react extremely negatively because it's an inappropriate use of force, because there is no real probable cause that they're doing something that could lead to violence, right? Because you can't, well, it's a matter of opinion, I guess, but you can't pull a gun out every time you pull someone over for a speeding ticket just in case, right? And things like that. So we didn't really get into a lot of that. That's not implying that there's anything wrong there, right? Just saying that it would be interesting to understand holistically what's going on with that. And then one of the points that came back to me, I think, Davis, you had brought up before, is just like in terms of the training of how to apply physical violence, especially, how often does that happen? Because that's not part of this course that we did, right? So you're not like learning how to do a chokehold. You're not learning how to handcuff people. They have separate courses for these sorts of things. They mention them. So again, not saying they don't, but just kind of like, what does that look like too? Right. And is that happening with frequency, so that when people are in a real life situation where your adrenaline is really high and it's difficult to think as it is, as we all learned who were doing the training, right? You have to then have a lot of reps under your belt for some of the physical maneuvers to actually be able to apply them correctly in a way that's not harmful to both people. So just some thoughts I had coming out of the training for myself. Anybody else? Connie, Mindy, Monique, John?
I thought it was very insightful. It broadened my lens for how to look at how quickly decisions have to be made, but it also begs the question of really desiring to understand a little bit deeper how their training is, and whether that's unconscious bias training, you know, whether that is younger, you know, folks that are on the force. It made me think about, you know, as you advance your career as a police officer, you tend to get further away from what we experienced. And so that's kind of scary, because you've got the least experienced officers in a lot of cases that are working the beat. I made that up from watching a detective movie. Is that what it's called, Davis? Working the beat? No. Oh, but think about that, you know, and you already think about experience within that kind of role, helping you make a judgment call and helping you to stay calm and know what to anticipate. And it just made me wonder, and grateful, quite frankly, for the fact that Apparently, based on what they shared, Brookhaven does a little more training, maybe an additional 4 weeks or so than most other Georgia cities. But it did make me wonder, a little bit deeper, especially after I killed 3 people and stunned somebody else.
Connie was gun first every time. She was
John,
not
I
messing
keep
around.
laughing.
Connie was gun first, and I was just stunned. I'm just standing there like,
I
It
bet
was-
now.
I mean, your heart started beating quickly and, you felt it. You felt what just happened. I tried to get a therapist afterwards, because it was like, oh man. The other thing I want to add to that is Sharuk is like 7'3" and Commissioner Funny is 7'2", and they don't look like that on camera, but I was like, hey, and I'm 5'10" and a half. But it was very informative. I mean, bottom line, and still made me curious about some other areas of training.
And I'll echo both what Sharuk and Connie shared. It was very eye-opening to see what happens within the milliseconds of an officer becoming engaged with any type of incident. And he walked us through an exercise to just show us how long 1 second really makes that a lot can happen in 1 second when you're an officer and you're dealing with crisis and you're dealing with an issue of that any magnitude, from an investigation or arriving on the scene. And it really opened my eyes to how the media plays a role in what the public sees, of course. But when he showed us the full video, we can easily, I know I could easily identify the snippet of what CNN would have played. And I think one situation, Connie was at a scene and she was, shooting someone, the young lady, she had her hands up, but the young lady already did the criminal act, just before that. And Connie was like shooting at her with the hands up. Well, CNN
He
would
shot
have
me first.
right. CNN would have played the clip. Officer shot young white female with hands up in the air, and that would have been the headline. But if you looked at the full video, it gave a good story of the narrative of what happened and took place. It really enlightened me to go through the training and to go through the review of the different laws that's on the book as it relates to use of force. Very, very good job, Co-Chair, setting that up. That worked really well.
I have a question. I did not attend this training, and it was because of, I just felt that, I'm just going to be honest, I just felt that for me to take the training, I'm not going to be able to use it. I thought it was great that you guys took it, and you could bring your perspective back. And I really think that what you were seeing, John, like it's like a millisecond that they have to respond, but it comes with lots and lots of training. You just got a snippet of what they are trained to do. So before they actually get on the street, they not only had this training, but they should have had several different scenarios. When we look at what Brookhaven is doing, and I think it's admirable that they are doing this and it's not state required. But my question is, how often are they giving this training? Because if it's a one-time thing, how often is the scenario changing? Okay, and then from us who are looking at it from a different perspective, saying, okay, we're talking about equality and equity and justice. Okay, you've gone through the training. So when you walked away with it, you got a different perspective from the police's point of view. I'm assuming from what you're saying, how quickly they have to respond. And John, like you were saying with CNN, that they don't show the whole video and how the police must respond. Because I see this as a small amount of training that what police have to go to be efficient in their job. Part of what police are going through is that they are not getting enough of this kind of training. And I also think they should go through mental and emotional, psychological kind of training so that they will respond in a more reasonable way. I don't want to be a police officer. I think their jobs are very, very, very difficult. Because as I watch these videos that come across the news, I see and say, no, what would have I done in that place? And a lot of times I see where I said, I would have responded probably the same, you know, no matter how much training. But I agree with Connie, as you age, you become a veteran. You think you know it all. You're a sergeant, you show up on the scene and you haven't had the training, but the young officers are going through the training, but you've had it, but you've kind of forgotten. I thought it was really interesting, and I do appreciate Major Harold and all of them for giving us this opportunity.
Yeah, as Sharuk mentioned, the police department, they do training annually. And not only that, they have a program internally, a system and a process internally where either the lieutenant or the sergeant, they review every video of every incident to identify if that officer needs to go to some training right away. And not only for training purposes, but the chief has actually fired police officers for doing things that was just not acceptable from review of a video. So they are constantly monitoring, and like Brookhaven does things, and I think Sharuk referenced to this, Brookhaven does things, the police department, that's not even required by the state. I think the total hours of training is 408 hours. I think our annual training is what, 1,100 hours or something to that effect. So they go way above and beyond what's required by state legislators. And what is interesting, we found out that cosmetology school license, they do more training than a police officer in the state of Georgia. So I can go get my hair cut by someone who had 1,600 and some hours of training. And my community is being protected by someone who had 408 hours of training. It's almost like, what's wrong with that picture?
Well, and we also learned that, I think it was Gwinnett, right, John, where they had a shortage. And so they removed something like a week's worth of training or something like that, just to get more police officers out there faster to respond to the shortage, which seemed troublesome.
Very.
You know, it made me wonder when they shared, go Monique, I've spoken, you go ahead, you keep trying to jump in and we keep talking.
No, it's fine. This is really about y'all. Are you sure?
Yes, I was saying Monique, but you go, Mindy. I'll just.
Oh.
No.
Okay, I'll go really quickly. I was just gonna say that one of the things that I agree, Brookhaven Police Department is impressive, and I think if it were to be compared side by side to, you know, all the ones in the state of Georgia, it would really be up there in terms of the level of training and I think just vetting that they do. I think two things that were not answered for me in the training, and I think are just really difficult to answer, and perhaps something that we might unpack in community engagement or research is number one, why am I losing it? Well, number one, there's the data piece. Oh, I really struggled with when it is appropriate to walk away from a situation as an officer that you know is going to get violent. You know, I just think about one of the videos that they shared of the veteran who got out of his car and started assembling his rifle. Like, there was a whole span where the officer could have, well, I say could have left as a civilian. Obviously his training tells him don't leave the scene. But I really struggled with that. I'm like, I don't think this is worth you know, this traffic stop was worth anyone's life. So that was difficult. And then the second thing for me is, you know, several weeks ago, we began this data deep dive. And so we know the demographics of who interacts with Brookhaven Police Department. And we know that it is overwhelmingly people that don't live in Brookhaven and people of color. And how do you come to terms with that? You know, if everyone's following their trainings by the book and that's just how the cookie crumbles, like, is that something that we are really okay with? Or is it something that we need to dig into? So.
my thoughts after attending the training is that I think that I've never sat that close to the sun before, right? Like being in a police department, receiving training. But what I've learned so far in dealing with Brookhaven's police department is that they are a very smart and polished department. I'm a federal employee and I came from the Department of Justice. And so it felt like when I deal with the FBI, that they are not your, backwater Georgia police department. And with that comes the intelligence enough to I don't want to say put on a good face because that seems so accusatory, right? But they are good. Like they are great at giving data. They are great at being or appearing, whichever one you want to use. I know language can be loaded, but transparent. They are great at appearing or being compassionate. And so with that, it made me weary, and it's unfortunate for them, right? Like I guess they're like, wow, we're good guys and we're showing you and you don't believe us. But it almost felt like the Twilight Zone. Everybody was so nice, everybody was so forthcoming, everybody, and in all of the videos, and Connie will tell you, I was like, oh, I shot him already. Like I pulled up and I shot him because I didn't like the way he looked, but I'm also, to Kathy's point, not a police officer, very intentional. I had all the majors, available to me when I stepped foot in college, and I said, law enforcement is not for me. I said, education is not for me. Like those are things I chose not to do because I know they weren't for me. And so, but for the people who did choose them, then there is this higher level of accountability. So it's not enough that when I see this video, I understand that I probably would have shot that person in 3 seconds with both of their hands up because I didn't understand what was going on. But that's different because I am an untrained individual who, who has no desire to protect and serve anyone but my children. And so with that it's like, I of course want to give all the kudos in the world, but it's also like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. Like my kid comes home with an A, I'm like, yeah, I might give you something, but that's also what you're supposed to do. So it is, it is what it is. So I really struggled with that. I struggled with, the videos being, the hard ones or the clear ones or the ones that are like, this man, he was assembling a gun, he was pointing it at someone. Yes, you shoot him dead, you shoot him in the head. And I don't care what, CNN, there was one guy that got shot and I told him, I was like, there would have been no marches for him. Like no one was going out to march for the shooting of the person who walked the police officers down with the knife. Like that is the extreme, case. And I know that even the ones that do have people in the streets marching are, for police officers, they're always questionable. They're always like, well, what happened immediately? Or, what happened before this person's background, but I don't believe that we've ever learned anything in the ones that really caused outrage in the communities. We haven't later learned anything that made it say, oh, well, I guess you're right. That's why the officer did that. Like, I mean, we can look at George Floyd and no one's going to say, oh man, if you did roll that back 5 more minutes, you would have seen a reason for that to happen, or, any other situation. And so I guess I just felt like it was a very polished presentation, and the individuals who were delivering them, their doctorate, what's his name that comes to our meetings, he's working on his PhD, so he's not, Beverly, he's not a hillbilly. He's not the norm. He's as polished as they come. He has the data. He has it, but when I even talking with Officer Martinez, he's not as polished as them. And there were like a lot of off the cuff comments that made me feel more, oh, that's Top Gun cop right there. Like he's the one like that may give you some trouble later on. And while he was a nice enough guy, you know, when we start talking about, I even said things like, oh, you know, because he identifies as Hispanic, I was telling him about the concerns we had as a commission about the data and the reporting on the Hispanic and the Black, and he says, well, why is that necessary? Why is that relevant? And I was like, huh. And he's like, you know, and I said, well, we just want to make sure that, you know, the population on Buford Highway, they're not over policed. I don't know what you mean by that term. What do you mean by over police? And I was like, well, I mean, of course, I'm not sure what the technical term of it is, but, you know, I mean, what do you say when there's more crime happening there? And that's where we go. That's just where we go. Like, officer, what is the other guy's name that gives us our data? Spivey. Officer Spivey would have never made both of those statements, regardless if they feel the same way. But when I talk to Officer Spivey about those same things, I get this lean in, compassionate, less defensive conversation, and we talk about the availability of or lack of availability of data in an agreement that something needs to happen. But with Officer Martinez, he's like, no, we're doing the best we can. We go over there, you know, we shoot who we shoot. We don't if we don't. We're not, every officer who comes out here is trying to do a good job. And it was like, huh, you know, but he's also not part of the program, right? The program that we were given, you know, to the people who come to see us, the Heralds, the Spiveys, the police chiefs of the world. Like, so it was just interesting and not bad. And I don't know how to say that concisely.
They knew you were coming. They knew you were
yeah,
coming.
you know,
They were ready. They were polished.
the
You're gonna show your best hand.
yeah.
They knew you were coming. They're gonna show you the best. They're gonna put the best people in front of you. That's what they're supposed to do.
The use of force training was eye-opening because it was intended to be eye-opening, right? They put the ones there that were going to give us the most pause. You know, they gave us the scenarios that we were going to shoot the person and then it turned out to be a kid, or, you know, it was a lot. But I think it was a phenomenal training. I did learn a great deal. I did have, you know, it was eye-opening. It was stressful. But, you know, it was what it was intended to be.
So not to cut us off, but I'm just going to do a quick time check to keep us going. But Davis, you've come on and off of mute a few times. He's got nothing more to add. We got it all covered here.
Davis, were you on the phone for the training at all? Did you dial in? Oh, okay.
No, Davis was out of town that weekend.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You're muted, Davis. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. That was the weekend. No, that was the funeral weekend. So I wasn't available to make it. I do want to say, Monique, just you're right about the best face forward type deal, but I'm glad you got to meet Sergeant Martinez, simply because you got to kind of see like who is, right? He's the training guy. And when they do put the spit and polish people in front of us, it can give you, and you know, it's like you said, if you're around FBI, you tend to see that the guy you normally talk to wears a 3-piece suit and is in shape, not the guy who's chunky that wears a polo shirt and wrinkled up pants every day. Yeah. You know, those are two different people. But I do want to just say, you're right. This isn't, you know, backwoods Georgia or backwoods Alabama where I worked. And I think we should be grateful that there is the data. I know the data is there's some murky points, but just that they even have it, that is not something that's normal. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so Brookhaven can seem spit and polished, but another thing to remember about Brookhaven is we're probably going to see less incidents of question in Brookhaven or a department like Sandy Springs, because they tend to hire people who have already worked somewhere else. Matter of fact, I was told I spent 2.5 hours with Brookhaven PD in jiu-jitsu training to this afternoon. Just an impromptu popped up. And so I went and I got to meet several people. And I had 2 different people tell me that they had been sergeants at other departments. And that's part of the vetting process that Brookhaven does, so that they don't deal with YouTube video caliber screw ups. Like, that's a real thing, and that Brookhaven can afford to hire. So you're going to see more spit and polish than you would in, you know, a rural department or somewhere like Gwinnett, or my goodness, Atlanta is 370 officers in the hole right now. And that never, that never gets filled by top quality people. When they're in a crunch like that and there's more people retiring than coming in the door, that's when they start to lower standards or they give crazy incentives. And man, it never works. I've got a story about Montgomery that I'll share at another time, where some civil rights things happened, and like all but 2 of the 12 people fired had been hired in this 1 year or this 13-month span when they were hurting for people. And so we're lucky that we have senior officers, and we're lucky that the chief is forward thinking enough to even have the data presented and then given to us. That's an important part. So when you look at that, you know, there is a grain of salt that you're going to see the spit and polish, which is why we're going to see Major Harrell and Lieutenant Snively more than we're going to see Martinez or Nunn or, you know, Collins, any of those folks. And that's, you know, that goes with just part of it and being in the commission. But there is something to be said with the fact that they even show us, that they even have the data to show, and that they freely showed. And then again, that we have senior officers. I don't know of, I think I met one today who was actually hired kind of off the street, so to speak, that they put through the academy. And if I'm not mistaken, she has a 4-year degree. And that's not normal for your typical American police officer. And that's almost regrettable, because I know that some of the things we're reviewing are going to be handled by, somebody said, you know, the more senior officers who aren't normally on the street to deal with things, maybe not in their departments where they were, but now they're just regular police officers in Brookhaven. So we kind of get a one up there as a city, as a community. So
Davis, I want to say for our committee, in my opinion, I can appreciate everything that you're saying, except I think we have to be very cognizant and careful to not feel lucky, because just because someone has a degree or they're more experienced doesn't mean that they check the box on what we're concerned about, and that's use of force. They could have 5 years and be more experienced, but it still doesn't necessarily mean that they have the mindset that we would want on the police force. Or we've still got to marry who's getting arrested and who is getting stopped and who's getting pulled over and what the force scenario is. And that data that we have, as much as it is great that they're being forthcoming, not, you know, better than most, but to me, that's still a low standard. And so if the intent is for Brookhaven, which I believe it is, to be the best, to be better at it, then there's got to be room for accountability, even when you're good. How will we make it even better if? And so I think it's almost like the phrase that Monique used is, my kid came home with an A. That's what you're supposed to do. Are we supposed to say you don't have to go to school tomorrow because you got an A? And so I think we've got to balance everything that you said, because I do think that that's important, with what the data or what we might be missing in the missed data, and be able to have a narrative around what our recommendation would be, as opposed to necessarily, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying, accepting because it's better than most. And that's a slippery slope that I think we've got to guard ourselves against.
Okay, maybe we should have bucketed a full hour for this discussion, because I got like 30 more minutes worth of things I kind of want to say now, but maybe we should like we could do a civic dinner with the subcommittee and chat through it. But just to thanks everyone for the comments. Really appreciate it. I think we can all agree that for everyone who attended, it was at some way gives us empathy towards the police officers of what they have to deal with in difficult situations, right? And that we just need to keep doing our work. So I'm going to go ahead and share the agenda again to talk about next steps from here. So this is the part of the process that I'm pretty excited about, which is getting prepared for the community engagement, right? So I'm a product manager by profession at a software company. That means, in a simple way, I tell people what to build to make our customers happy so we can sell things, right? And we have this saying in product management that the right answer is not within the four walls of the building. The right answer is out there with your customers and with your prospects to figure out what they really want. And so we've spent the past 6 months inside the four walls of our building, and now we're starting to prepare to get out there and start to figure out what the people actually think, right? And validating some of our assumptions and findings. So we may not make it, but we're going to try to make it in 15 minutes. The goal is that we wanted to do a quick review. Mindy will walk us through just the 4P assessment tool that we talked about in a commission meeting a few months ago. Maybe you remember, maybe you don't, but that was kind of the framework we're going to use to build the assessment of what we're looking at. And then the idea is that we as a team will come up with our priority items, and then going away from this meeting, just like we did with the complaint data, I will send out in Basecamp assignments for those items so one item per couple people, where each individual will go through and apply the 4 Ps to that priority item that we want to investigate. And then we'll come back with our assessment in our next commission to start working through next steps from there. So with that, Mindy, I will hand it over to you to give us a quick overview of the 4 Ps again. And you're muted. You're muted, Mindy. We can't hear you.
That's fine. I was basically talking to myself. So I wonder, in the interest of time, so after I went over this, the plan was that we would try to prioritize. And I wonder, do you have a list ready? I'm just wondering, because I want to get people out by 6:30 or not, if people are willing to stay. If we might assign some of the work that we were going to do in the meeting as homework. So y'all sit on that and I'll explain this assessment tool. So I actually, you know what, I'm going to back up for a second and actually flash up the original process that we had framed. So you all can see where we are. Okay, so this, oh, where's the updated one? Well, ignore the dates for now, and I'm just gonna walk you through the phases. So we are just about wrapping up phase 1, this grounding and this data piece. We've spent the past 2 months digging into the data, and we feel like we've generated a number of different questions and potential issues that we want to dig into deeper, right? And so now we're moving into phase 2, which is the assessment phase. And this assessment phase is about getting clear about what our priorities are, because right now they're all kind of, I visualize it as like all these thought bubbles above my head. And this is about getting down on paper and trying to be somewhat scientific about how we will prioritize different issues, because we have to. We're 10 people. There's no way we're going to get to everything. And so what's most important to us? And then once we are able to name those priorities, that'll inform the research that we might want to do a little bit deeper. For example, the idea of a citizen review board had come up in a few conversations. And so, is that something that we actually want to verify and do more research? Or is it something that we want to do stakeholder engagement around? So that assessment phase will be able to get clear on what we're going to research and do engagement around in phase 3. And then, of course, the last phase is articulating, developing our recommendations. So the assessment phase centers around this 4P assessment tool that we developed to hopefully make it easy to assess and be consistent in how everyone is assessing different issues. So what you would do is you identify the issue, just one issue, isolate it and say, this is what I want to dig into deeper. So one thing that's come up, I think, at almost every meeting is the inconsistency around demographic data in terms of, obviously it's tracked very well by the police department, but it's inconsistent with how other fields, other fields may define race groups or categories.
Hey, Mindy, not to interrupt you, but there is a comment in the chat. Could you just zoom in or go into presenter view?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
So let's say that's the issue that we're trying to dig into. There are 4 buckets of questions that we want to answer. First one being around people, place, process, and power. And so it may take a few kind of, I don't want to say imagination, but maybe a little bit of speculation. But when you think about this data that exists and the fact that it's, kind of inconsistent, asking the question, who's most affected by this issue? Or another way of thinking about it is, if we had that data, who would it benefit? And then what's the cost of this is inequity, but really think about it in terms of the issue. What's the cost of the issue on others? What are we losing by not having this data? Or who's losing because we don't have this data? And so you do the same sort of exercise with each of these different buckets. And we have a little template that we'll share out. And then you'll turn that back over to us, your Chrysalis Lab liaison, and we will synthesize your responses so that in the next meeting, we'll have a little bit of direction, a starting point for conversation in terms of what we want to focus on and why.
Not that you asked for a vote, but my vote would be for homework, because I'd love to not rush through this and give some thought. If you give us a little more direction with what issues we're trying to tackle, or whether you guys want to give thought to divvying them up like we did the other data information, or if each one of us needs to tackle it for our top 5 or 10 issues. But personally, I'd like to give more thought than just 10 minutes to going through this process.
Yeah,
And I think what the intent is, the next item on the agenda was one to just kind of explain the assessment tool, and that's what Mindy is doing. And then what we can do for the rest of the time is see if we can come to some consensus about what our issues are that are going to go in the middle. Like what are our issues after looking at the data, attending use of force training, having conversations. And if we can determine what the issues are, then Connie, yes, we will then assign those issues out to either individuals or worker pairs and see if we can flesh out the assessment tool, people, place, process, power around each of those issues. So we've had kind of one of the issues Mindy brought up. And then we have a few other things that have come up over the last few months. And if there's nothing else to add, then we can go with those. If this last conversation raised some other issues, we'll go with those. And then if you can think of something after we get offline, then we'll do that. But Sharuk, didn't we have like a number of issues we were hoping to keep it under? Was it?
Yeah, I think we wanted
Three,
to have no
five.
more than 5, right? We want to keep it, and anything, if we end up with 12 issues, let's be honest, we're not going to get much done, right? Because it's going to be too scatterbrained, and we wanted multiple people's eyes going through each assessment as well. Just because there's
Mhm.
diversity of thought that way, right? And it's good to get different people to look at different things. And the goal, to be clear, and I know we just have 6 minutes, and I can hear the baby that I have to go to in 6 minutes, so we can agree to do it offline if we need to. But the goal was basically to do a roundtable discussion of what are the issues that everyone is seeing, right? We've talked about the data and how we report on Hispanic or not. Like Mindy said, and other people have brought up the Citizen Review Board. Other people are worried about other sorts of trainings, right? And diversity training. And Davis has brought up how often are they doing jujitsu training? Sounds like you got to experience that today, right? And those sorts of things. And then use that as, okay, this is the list. How do we want to prioritize it? What are the most important, right? And then move forward. So one thought
Yeah,
that I
and we
had,
could possibly collapse some issues into each other. So let's just see what we have by way of a list of issues, and then we'll figure out prioritizing them.
Yep.
So we all will agree that, you know, the reporting on the Hispanic data,
why don't I
why.
share my screen? I'm going to steal it from you, Mindy, and I'll just write it live
Okay.
because I am very
Okay.
visual.
Okay, so we have the reporting, Hispanic data, white, black. Yeah, and so then I had, one of the previous things that we talked about was the self-investigation aspect of the complaints. So I think that goes to the review boards and then we had cultural sensitivities. That kind of came out with the complaint data. We saw a lot of folks were being rude, or, you know, that kind of went to that. And those were the ones that came out of the review of the data. Oh, and then basically the use of force training as far as like how often, refreshers, and how much. Yeah.
So
That's all I had as far as the first,
Theo?
anyone else?
So
Yeah.
I'll add a couple that have come into my head as we've gone through our committee meetings and just through discussions and things like that. So one is, one thing I would like to understand from the community is how comfortable do they feel calling the police? Right.
Yeah.
And across the different districts, is that cool? Is that not cool? Right. What is people's, and then if they do call the police, what is the perception of that person of how that went? Did they feel it was appropriate? Did they get what they need? Were they served well? That sort of stuff. And I had a third one, but it's gone. It's been a long day, but just, the last one was, do they ever see police outside the context of calling them? Right? Do they come to their place of worship or their association or whatever, so that they can build an independent relationship that's not just driven on, hey, something's wrong, can you come help me?
I think comfort in calling the police is a big one. I mean, I had a
Yeah.
scenario where I asked the restaurant not to call the police on this Black woman. And I'm glad they didn't, because she was intoxicated, et cetera. But my thought and was that, this might not go well, you know? So that's a really good one.
Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to see something about mental health and how I'm sorry I missed the training. My daughter had surgery, and so we went down to help her. But something about mental health and how the Brookhaven Police handles that. And I was wondering, did they speak anything about the mental health workers?
So they did give a response in, and I have, I think here the responses, Janice, to the question we had sent over around the mental health. I think that we sent this document out, but I'll find it and follow up with you. But the response was basically, if I remember correctly, we have the mental health workers.
Right.
It's still early. We don't really know conclusively what the results are, but study shows it's going to be good. The one thing we learned at the training is that, and it was just kind of on the side conversation, that many times those mental health workers aren't available.
Ah,
So like Lieutenant Snively, I think, said, yeah, it's a weekend, so it's not like we could bring them today anyways.
oh, okay. Yeah. But I do want to mention, I looked up, I remember Mr. Funny, or no, one of the speakers we had talked about ideal police departments around the country, and one was Austin, Texas. I looked them up, and they have a lot on mental health, a whole page of resources and things. So, you know, maybe Brookhaven could steal some of that information, make that available to residents in Brookhaven. So just a thought.
We'll borrow it. We won't steal it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I want to offer maybe a possible next step, because I know we kind of, I don't want to say we spring it on everyone, but I'm wondering if people might need like few minutes or hours to think about their response. And so what if we posted this list to Basecamp and gave everyone a few days to add to it? And then something I could offer up is creating a survey that'll allow people to say what their top 5 are.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking too, Mindy, especially since I think a few people who were at the training and are part of the committee aren't here today. So what I'll do right now, so I don't forget, because that's how I work, is I will go ahead and post this on Basecamp now. Why doesn't everyone take some time to think through it? And maybe what we do is just set a deadline for next Wednesday. So that gives us a week for everyone to share their ideas, and then we can get a survey out. And then next meeting, we can just kind of look through the survey, hand out assignments, right? And talk through what all that looks like, do the lumping up, pulling apart, and all that sort of stuff Monique was
May
talking
I
about.
add one more, please?
I was gonna say, I wanted Kathy, I think she was in the
I
middle
want
of.
to add one
you
more. and I
just
think
one
this-
before she brought-
I have 2 comments. Janice asked a question last time when she said, why do police shoot to kill? I don't know if that question was answered while you were in the use of force.
We did at the use of force training. Yeah, we
Now you
got
know
a lot
why.
of information
So
on
I
that.
think I think, Kathy, it's really about the mechanics of how difficult it is to shoot a gun to begin with, right? So it's, if you've ever shot a gun or gone to the gun range, it's like you put that thing 30 feet out and suddenly it's this small and you don't know what's happening. So I think a lot of it is based on the fact that there's a lot of adrenaline going. It's going to be very hard to hit that target, especially on a moving target, right? Regardless of who you are. The second is that in several instances that we saw, right? I mean, there's like, what does the broader data look like? But you watch the video and the cop shot the guy 5 times in the chest and she still got stabbed, right? And then it took three more shots to get that person down because of the adrenaline that's going in the person and the body's ability to ignore that for a certain amount of time.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to add to this list, police and community, police involved in the community, other than, showing up for calls. Police involvement in the community is very important, and we see police in a different role. We know they're police, but kids are afraid of police. A lot of the kids that I work with, because they come from brown and Black communities, they're afraid of police. And it's important that the police become more involved in the community so they can see them in a different light. Not only kids, but adults too. So I think that's something we might want to address.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Kathy? Those are both good points.
No,
though.
I'm
Sorry,
good. I'm good.
sorry,
I'm
we
good.
never circled back to Janice's question from last time, but it definitely came up during the use of force training. Okay, so I will post this on Basecamp. I'll put the deadline for next Wednesday so that everybody else knows. Please share your thoughts and then post that. Mindy will get a survey out and then we can work through the survey results in our next meeting. Does that sound like a good plan for everyone? Okay, cool. Well, Monique, you called the meeting, so you're gonna have to adjourn us.
Well, I'm gonna I don't think we need a motion to adjourn a subcommittee meeting, right? No?
No, I think.
All right, well, thank you all for coming tonight. We have next steps, so please be on the lookout for the information on Basecamp, and everybody, thanks for coming out. Good night.
Have a good night.
Great
Thank you.
meeting. Great meeting.
Really.
See you
Bye.
guys.
Davis.